Welcome in. Happy Wednesday evening to you. Surprise, surprise. Guess what we have, everybody? We've got playoff changes on the way. It's already been more than telegraphed. A Ross Dellenger article, another thing that was very predictable. In fact, I believe I predicted exactly that as soon as we saw what the playoff field was and the fact that the SEC only got 3 teams in and the fact that there were Big 12 champ, ACC champ, and a G5 champ all ahead of at-large teams from the Big Ten and the SEC, you knew you were going to start to hear from that league about we need change. We need change to what the playoff is, and that is happening. It is very interesting, I will admit, some of what is in this proposal that Ross Dellenger lays out. Josh Pate has also talked about it this week. I am very intrigued by, okay? I'm definitely very intrigued. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for the Big 12, actually. And we're going to talk about that. Like, how does it actually affect this conference? Same with the ACC. But it is just so on brand. Greg Sankey spoke a little bit to Ross Dellenger. Didn't get into a lot. There was definitely some whining. But he did abstain from a lot, which, I suppose is somewhat commendable. We've got a lot of hiring news in the Big 12. West Virginia has hired a new football coach reportedly, and it is Rich Rod. That is where it really felt like everything was going, and that is where all country roads wound up. Very much like the Scott Frost hire, quite obviously. You can see the similarities there. I was not in love with the Scott Frost hire at UCF. I'm not in love with this hire for West Virginia either, but I do think that it makes more sense than Frost did, at least in terms of upside and mitigating potential downside. Probably more in the mitigating potential downside there. On that front, I'm telling you, I think there were a couple of really good moves made that were savvy and flew more under the radar by both Iowa State and Utah. So as much as we can talk about, hey, new era for West Virginia, new era for Scott Frost at UCF, all of this, what's really happening here is 2 programs that are very solid. I know Utah had a tough year, but still a pretty rock-solid program. 2 programs that are very solid made some really good moves. They made some really, really good moves, I thought, this week. And BYU, Moneybags BYU, man, they just landed the number 1 basketball player in the country for the class of 2025. So that's going to make them very, very intriguing to watch. Landed him over Kansas, Alabama, North Carolina, AJ DeBonsta. Hope I'm saying that correctly. I would like to talk about that a bit as well today on the show. So that's the rundown. You can see it there on the side of the graphic, people. It is all right there for you. We also, I've got to get to, I'm glad that I just remembered this. I've got to get to some comments from Venmo. That is one way that you can get in touch with me here on the show. It is John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. If you are not watching live and you want to make sure that your question or comment makes the show, you can do so there. It is much appreciated as always. But if you're here in the chat right now, you also know how to get in touch. And that is by simply just filling up the regular chat. But if you want to ensure that your question or comment makes it on the show, you can do so with a super chat donation. Click the $sign below the chat box. In order to do that, it will include it in a special separate column for me, which ensures that your question or comment does make it on the show tonight. So I much appreciate everybody who does that. Could not do it without all of your support. Love all of you guys who do, but totally understand if you can't. Just click the like button on the video. That definitely helps. And subscribe to my Big 12 newsletter, Open for Business. It is ofbnews.com to subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. That is ofbnews.com. 3,200 plus Big 12 fans reading it right now. Shout out to everybody. Got a Big 12 anonymous player survey that we're working through right now. And basketball sent one out earlier today where you will find out which opposing coach in the league most players want to play for. And we had a really tight race up at the top for that one. So Big 12 news, no SEC or Big 10 bias. I'm telling you what all the major college football news means for the Big 12. You don't have to wade through anything else. You can get it directly to your inbox for free by subscribing at ofbnews.com. I'm seeing you guys. Clickbait. Guys, the changes are going to happen. They're going to happen. We have it laid out by Ross Dellenger in the story where it's going. No, the changes are not in place for the playoff coming up this year. But you can call it clickbait all you want. It's a major story from Yahoo. Josh Pate literally went on his show earlier this week, one of the most connected guys in the SEC, and said definitively this is happening. Unless you want to bury your head in the sand, that is what is happening. The playoff is going to change. It may not be next year because they still need unanimous support for that next year. But 2026, unanimous support out the window. So in a couple of years, it's going to happen. So you can say what you want about it, but it is inevitable. That is playoff change. Look, playoff change was always inevitable, and that is a part of this. As I will roll into this in just a moment, but the starting point on this is basically that it really feels like the SEC and Big Ten, but particularly the SEC, kind of knew like what was going to happen this year, knew how this would all go down, knew how it would be received, and they knew what the pivot was going to be, and they've just had to sort of play the long game. Chess, not checkers sort of situation on the playoff format. Now, the other part of that is, again, I do think that some of this can actually benefit the Big 12. So we will get to all that. Already changing is clickbait, John. If it isn't breaking news, there will be changes for it. Okay, well, guess what, Sam? You clicked it, buddy. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the bait, just like a nice little mouse, sneaking up on the cheese. You chopped it and you're in here. Gil, I very much appreciate Gil. John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo. Gil says, just want to support you. I'm a big BYU fan and love your channel. Thank you, Gil. Gil also said, actually, I thought of a good question. Can we talk about the Baylor win over Kansas? What happened there? Well, that we did spend some time on that when it happened at the end of the year. I mean, what happened there is Baylor's pretty damn good. And if they would have batted down a Hail Mary in Boulder, they would have been right there in the Big 12 championship conversation at the end of the year. They were just playing like a team possessed. They were at home. Kansas may have run out of gas at the end of the 3 ranked opponents in 3 straight weeks run that they were on. And hey, who knows? Kansas fans, maybe it was just that Jeff Grimes had one foot out the door. Maybe it was that Jeff Grimes was already looking too far ahead to that Wisconsin job that he wound up finding. It's funny because Kansas fans celebrated him leaving. So anyway, Gil, I appreciate you, my man. Thank you for weighing in there. Brian on Venmo as well. John-Kurtz-4. The biggest issue for us was bad losses. Arizona State had the highest college football playoff rank for losing to a non-bowl team. Okay, BYU fan here. Biggest issue for us was bad losses. ASU had the highest college football rank for losing to a non-bowl team. None of us would want Ole Miss above Georgia after KU loss. For BYU, we should have done our bye after Utah not play Jake against KU when he was so banged up. Okay, so Brian is making a point here about Jake Retzloff, who I did hear that. That was the chatter out of BYU circles, that in the Kansas game, Jake Retzloff was kind of beat up. I don't think you can. Well, I guess you can. Part of it is at that point, you're in the thick of it. You got to win that game if you're going to keep your playoff hopes alive, really. Or at least it feels like it there. If you want to keep the dream season alive, it's really hard to hold a guy out and say, well, you should have erred on the side of caution when you knew that was going to be a dangerous game. In hindsight, I do feel like that's one of those, hindsight's 20/20 sort of things. Obviously, you lost the game anyway. He threw a bad pick. He wasn't very effective. Hindsight's 20/20. You wish you would have held him out then and rest him up, get him more healthy, but can't go back and change it now. And yeah, maybe Gary Bohannon, whoever's coming in, I assume, would it have been Gary Bohannon playing quarterback then? Whoever's coming in would have had a better game, perhaps. I don't know. Not exactly sure. But I get it, Brian. Lots of things to lament when your team is that close. And again, I've made the point many a times here on this channel. BYU certainly deserved a lot more at-large consideration. They definitely deserved more at-large consideration. Oh, I see this. What's up, Level Devil? I was a K-State Delta Sig. That is correct. You're able to see you can see the paddle back there. Hey, Yitbos, my friend. That'll get you on the show for sure. Okay. Got some more people in here. Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com if you want Big 12 news straight to your inbox 3 times a week, and the Big 12 Anonymous Basketball Player Survey. I mentioned with the playoff changes that are inevitably coming now, and the Ross Dellenger article has tipped everybody off here. It was very predictable that this was on the way. We've seen the SEC fit that has been thrown over the last 48 to 72 hours since we got the playoff field on Sunday. And you knew with only 3 SEC teams in the field, with Tennessee not getting a hosting spot, having to go to Ohio State, and the fact that you have a Big 12, an ACC champ, and a G5 champ all in front of at-large SEC teams, you knew that you were going to get something like this from Greg Sankey. Now, what I will say is, the initial reaction, I think, from a lot of people would be like, oh, God, okay, of course they're going to change it back and tilt the scales back in their favor even more. They've already got their thumb on the scale of everything. And yes, that is true, but I do think these changes can be very beneficial for the Big 12 and the ACC as well. So let me read to you a little bit from what Ross Dellenger had to say. He started out by saying that Sankey is not in favor of drastic changes to the playoff. And I read that and was kind of like, what I've already heard about this is that it does seem like a pretty drastic shift, but fair enough. But Dellenger did say, however, Sankey did acknowledge that the 12-team format was intended for a world that featured 5 somewhat equitable power conferences and not the current landscape of 4 inequitable power leagues. Now, that makes sense. I saw that already pointed out by somebody in the chat tonight. I get it. That does make sense. The problem with this is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like a self-created problem here. The reason that we have these inequitable conferences is because Greg Sankey started this by taking Texas and Oklahoma. So that's the reason that the dominoes started to fall. And then you have USC and UCLA leaving. And then you've got Oregon and Washington. All that movement started because of the SEC taking Texas and Oklahoma. So it's creating your own problem. It's the meme, right, with the guy with the gun who turns back and shoots the other guy and is like, why would so-and-so do this? It's like the SEC shooting a playoff format that makes sense. Why would the SEC do that? That's the meme just in action here. So it's a little bit annoying. Sankey said, this is one of the few quotes he actually gave. He said, we're seeing the stress points that we knew would be there, but I actually think they're more volatile than we thought. Now we have a whole different conference dynamic. So what happens? He did pass on answering some things, which was interesting. Asked for his thoughts on this year's selections and the future of the selection committee, he gave a 1-sentence answer. Quote, I need to have a much better understanding with their decision-making than I have right now. Okay. Basically a way to say these guys did not do a good job at all. Part of the problem here is, and I think Greg Sankey is savvy enough to realize this, which is why we're going to get to what these major changes are that they are telegraphing right now are going to happen. He knows that the committee is going to change. You get different people in there. They are short stints when you're on the committee. So different people in a different year could emphasize a different element, whatever it is that they want that year, whether it is strength of schedule or strength of record or top 25 wins, whatever metric they want to use, it can change year to year based on who's in that room. Long ago, we started seeing reports of the SEC and Big Ten talking about just doing away with the committee entirely. And it would be basically for that reason. If they want to make these changes that Greg Byrne at Alabama is talking about, and altering non-con scheduling and that type of thing, it's dangerous to do that based off of 1 year from one committee because you don't know what you're going to get with the next one. And like things can really change. And so I think there's a piece of that in that answer from Sankey as well. He did not expound upon his answer and declined follow-up questions. However, Sankey confirmed that changes to the playoff can be made as soon as next year's playoff. But most or all of those changes are expected to require unanimity among the 10 conferences. So you'd have to get everybody to vote in unison to make changes for next year. Could happen. Doubt that you're going to see that, right? Are you going to get the group of 5 to sign off on no more auto buys for the top 5 conference champions when they just saw Boise get a 3 seed? Boise just got a freaking 3 seed. Boise just got a 3 seed. You're not going to get them to sign off on that, right? But if you move on past that, they did agree on that 6-year extension through 2031. That does not require unanimity. And they do have the staples that they've already agreed upon that will be there. 5 highest ranked conference champions will get in, but they do not have to get buys. There's protection for Notre Dame if they finish high enough in the rankings, and they've also agreed on either 12 or 14 teams. But everything else can be changed, Ross Dellenger notes. Most notably, the future of the first-round buys, the number of automatic qualifiers per conference, and the selection and seeding process. So guess what? There's a reason that a guy as connected as Ross Dellenger lays that out there. Hey, here are 3 things that can be changed. Why would you do that? Well, because those are 3 things that will be changed. That's where you're going to see the change from this. So this is really the key paragraph of this whole deal from Dellenger. Big Ten and SEC officials, as well as other highly placed sources around college athletics, believe that leaders will re-examine the first-round bye rule, potentially seeding the field in alignment with the rankings. If that happened this year, the top 4 seeds would be number 1, Oregon, number 2, Georgia, number 3, Texas, and number 4, Penn State. The 8-9 game, I actually love this. The 8-9 game would be Boise State, Indiana, instead of Ohio State, Tennessee. That would be a really fun game. I would enjoy that a lot. Look, in a perfect, idyllic world, idealistic college football playoff that you have here, yes, it probably makes the most sense to just your top 4 teams, whatever criteria you're using to determine those, your top 4 teams get the buys. It makes a lot of sense. Dellenger pointed out later on, pre-Texas, Oklahoma to the SEC and all the latest realignment with the Pac-12, all that, your 5 highest ranked conference champions in the top 4 getting buys only once in the last decade, maybe it was, or in the playoff era, would there have actually been a G5 team in that group, and it would have been in 2020, which definitely was a wonky year anyway. So that is why we have this difference and contrast here and why they're wanting to do it this way. Now, I do understand that, yes, but this is a channel. If you are new here, by the way, please subscribe if you have not subscribed to the channel. This is all about college football from a non-Power 2 perspective. Okay, this is not a channel that originates from Big Ten or SEC country. From a non-Power 2 perspective, you look at that complaint from everybody and roll your eyes because college football has never been equitable. It has never been fair. Never. Throughout the history of the sport, it's always been slanted toward the big brands, the big conferences. It's always been like that. And so for once, something doesn't go the SEC's way, and now we have to sit here and hear about how unfair this format is and how bad it is that we're giving away these free buys and all of that. And it's like, man, that is college football. You can say what you want, but that is what the sport is. Not fair, inequitable. It's just that it's never happened to them. Dellenger goes on to say, during college football playoff negotiations in the spring, the Big Ten proposed a 12 or 14 team bracket that gave 3 automatic berths each for the SEC and Big Ten, 2 each for the ACC and Big 12, and 1 for the highest ranked G5 champ. Yeah, there were even proposals that had 4 for the ACC and Big 12, or 4 for the SEC and Big 10, and then 2 for the ACC and Big 12. Okay. The automatic burst would presumably be based on conference standings. We remember that whole line of thinking, right? And that got a lot of pushback. Hey, why would the Big Ten and the SEC need 4 automatic bids? Why do they need that? Well, we now know why, because another part of this concept that Dellenger is saying people in college athletics are telling him about lays out that multiple automatic bids would come with the reimagining of conference championship weekend. Remember, one of the other big issues everybody has been talking about now is, what do you do with these conference championship games? If they're not going to mean as much, and if, say, like Oregon just played in a game where you can definitely debate they did worse for themselves by winning in terms of what their playoff path was going to be, what's the future here? If they're not going to be important, you can't just get rid of them. It's a big moneymaker. Well, here's their solution. And this is, Dellenger quotes officials have discussed. He is saying a lot of people in college athletics are saying this. Again, Josh Pate, another big-time college football voice, has said the same thing. People are telling him this, and it will happen. You will get a play-in style conference tournament where winners punch their bids into the playoff. So, for instance, if you go with 3 auto bids, all right, the Big Ten and the SEC have 3 auto bids. The top 2 teams in the conference standings are getting in. They don't have to play on conference championship weekend, which that piece of it kind of makes sense, right? You don't have to go through and get yourself beat up in one of those games. And then number 3 and number 4 meet in a play-in game. So instead of the conference championship game, you've replaced it with every year guaranteed high-stakes game. Winner take all. Basically, it's the first round of the playoff right there. Winner is getting in. That actually sounds like a very, very good idea. I think that would be wildly entertaining. It ensures that your conference championship game is going to have the type of stakes that will get people to tune in, the drama that you want, and just seems more fair that you have to earn your way in if you are in one of those 2 spots. Now, a part of the problem you're going to run into with that is, again, we have such bloated, massive conferences thanks to the greed of the SEC and Big Ten and TV networks, that you'll have all these wacky tiebreakers. Like the SEC had 4 teams sitting there at 5-3 in the conference. So how do you break up those ties to see who's playing in the game? That will get very contentious, but it's inevitable. You already have it right now for who gets into the conference championship game. That is a new reality of all of this. But I tell you what, if this is the system, which, again, for all intents and purposes, it seems very inevitable this is where we are going to be headed. I actually can get behind that system for a number of reasons, even from the non-Power 2 perspective. We saw how things were treated this year, right? Like, especially for the Big 12. BYU, resume very comparable to Miami, if not objectively better. I would argue objectively better. Yet you're 5 spots below them in the playoff rankings. You get no at-large consideration at all. If that's the reality in the world that you're going to be living in, if you get a chance to sign up for something that has 4 auto bids for the SEC, or 3, especially if it is 3 auto bids for the SEC and Big Ten, and you get 2 auto bids, boy, I would take it. Because even if it were a 14-team field this year, which is what it very well may be if you're going to go through the auto bids thing, a 14-team field was not going to include another Big 12 team. That was not going to get BYU into the field. So the way the league has been handled and treated this year, that seems like a pretty damn good deal to me, actually, to sign up for that. And then, my question there becomes, if that happens, I imagine that the Big 12 championship game turns into the same deal, where it would be the play-in game at the end of the year. This is something, it's funny. I was thinking about this earlier today. This is something, just talking to some people before the season, beginning of the season. It was something that came up and had been discussed, that this was an idea floating around in the TV world. I heard it from multiple places. I just didn't hear it framed quite like this. And they were talking about, hey, last week of the regular season, you could have some sort of play-in game and get those teams. This is what they were meaning. Now it's coming out. No secret. To tie all this back to the beginning, it seems like this was the SEC kind of had this in mind. SEC Big Ten, this is where we will go. We need to wait a year for the system to do what we think it is going to do. We will complain and talk about how ridiculous that is, and then we will make the change to this. That's what it really feels like. That is definitely what it feels like. To finish this off from Dellenger, Sankey has declined to publicly comment about the proposal. But on Tuesday, he discussed the selection process. Quote, there is feedback about let's go back to the BCS and let the computers do it. Well, in the BCS era, we said we need people. So if computers and humans aren't the solution, doesn't that leave one last effort for conference standings to determine the field? I'm not commenting on that, but you can draw that conclusion. Again, this is very, very, very funny. This is very funny that you've got Greg Sankey basically trying to lead us all here as well. So back to the people who are saying, it's not. No, it is inevitable. Greg Sankey is laying it out there for you. We will do away with worrying about the committee for the majority of our bids here. We'll go to conference standings. Yeah. The rule permitting 5 conference champs into the field displaced 3 of Sankey's teams. Quote, that was going to be a problem. We've seen the problem now. Not all things are created equal or formed equally. Once again, time is a flat circle. We're back to telling the SEC, yes, we know college football is not fair. Welcome to the party. Glad that you finally noticed it, Greg Sankey. Unfortunate that it took your conference and a 3-loss Ole Miss team being left out of the playoff for you to notice. But that is the Ross Dellenger story. That is where this is going to go. I fully expect that. And even if you are a Big 12 or ACC fan, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. G5, it really doesn't change a whole lot because you're still only going to get one automatic bid. And the thing that will change actually is that you won't have a chance to get one of those 4 buys in all likelihood, unless somehow you are one of the top 4 teams one year playing just a behemoth of a schedule somehow. All it's going to do is just take away any chance that you would ever get a buy. That's basically it. So I don't mean to laugh. That's just the harsh reality for G5. But for Big 12 and ACC, seeing the way your league has been treated, ACC was only going to get 1 in if there wasn't an upset in the conference championship game. The Big 12, there was no scenario, even in a 14-team playoff, where you were getting 2 in. I would sign up for the 2 auto bids. I would definitely sign up for the 2 auto bids. Okay, let's get to a super chat here from Tay. What's up, Tay? Thank you for being here. Tay says, if a team can't even finish in the top 3 in their own league, how are they supposed to win a natty? Well, this is where SEC folks would tell you the SEC is just so strong and it's so many teams beating up on each other. And because we are so good, yes, of course, there would be 5, 6, or 7 teams that could win the national championship. Because if you take insert hypothetical 5th place SEC finishing team here and match them up against insert hypothetical 3rd place finishing Big 10 team or 1st place finishing Big 12 team or 1st place finishing ACC team, wouldn't even be close. They would wipe the floor with them. That's the SEC. That's the power of that logo. That is what they would tell you. What I would tell you is there is something to, in this day and age of college football, with more parity. I think you will continue to see teams that could be good enough to win the national championship drop 2 or 3 games in the regular season and still maybe have a chance to play at that level. I mean, I do think, for instance, like Ole Miss, if you want to argue Ole Miss's talent level is good enough to still win the national championship, I think you can make that case. They shouldn't be in the playoff because they lost 3 games, but you can make the case that they would still be talented enough to do that. And I think you will see leagues just sort of cannibalizing each other, beating up on each other, and there would actually be enough teams in some of these cases to do that, to make that sort of run. I think the calculus on that has changed a little bit. That's what I would say, Tay. But I understand in general the sentiment there. Like, hey, kind of like you had your chances. You had your chances. I saw Brian said he sent me something else on Venmo. I'm trying to look through that here, Brian. But I'm not seeing it. So my apologies. It's also not letting me log in to see more. So I'm sorry, Brian. If you've got what it is that you wanted to get out there, just send it in the regular chat, and I will take a peek there. All right. If you have a super chat, you want to be a part of this tonight, Click the $ below the chat box in order to submit a super chat. It will guarantee that your question or comment makes it on tonight. Appreciate everybody who does that. Totally free way to support the channel. Like the video. And we have a lot of new people in from Twitter now from the last time I said this. So if you are not a subscriber to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, if you want to read the Big 12 basketball players anonymous survey, find out where they think is the toughest place to play in the league, who has the meanest fans in the league, what coach they'd want to play for outside of their own, you can subscribe at ofbnews.com. That's ofbnews.com. And join 3,200 plus other Big 12 fans who subscribe to Open for Business. West Virginia's made a hire, my friends. West Virginia has hired Rich Rod. Rich Rodriguez, who came within an eyelash of taking West Virginia to the national championship before losing a game that I will not even mention for the sake of West Virginia fans, because I understand K-State has its own in 1998 Texas A&M. But I don't love this hire. I don't love this hire for the same reasons that I didn't love the Scott Frost hire at UCF. But I will say, I will level with you, Mountaineer fans, I think there are reasons to believe that this is better, less risky than what UCF did with Scott Frost. I will say that. And I would also add that other hires we're seeing across the country right now are showing why, one, this may have been necessary, and two, relative to the field this year of teams making hires, that this hire looks better. So that's my compromise for you, West Virginia fans. The easy part of this is, I mean, this is going to be a repeat of some of what I said with Frost, but the stuff I don't like about it, I don't like going with the nostalgia hire. I don't like the nostalgia hire because I think it can very easily cloud your judgment on things that would be red flags, things that would be things that you remember with rose-colored glasses that aren't actually as rosy as you remember them. You know, that can happen with some memories. Things get warped. It's been a really long time since 2007. It's been a long time since even Neil Brown was hired, and West Virginia has been unranked the entire tenure there. So that makes you start longing for the good old days. That will change things. There's also the fact that just the sport has evolved and changed quite a bit. So if you are thinking about, one, like how much the game has changed since 2007 that Rich Rod's been there, I mean, that's one thing. But even if, you know, how long's it been since he had the Arizona job when he was coaching at the Power 4 level? Like NIL, totally different monster. There's way more things that you have to manage there. He's been at Jacksonville State, yes, but that's not the Power 4 level, and you're not dealing with the same complications that you're going to deal with at the Power 4 level. I just think a lot of times with these nostalgia hires, it's like trying to put toothpaste back into a tube. You can't put the toothpaste back into the tube and then close the cap and bam, it's 2007 again. You just can't do that. And I say that as I fully get it. I was talking to my buddy Mountaineer Paul. You should subscribe to his channel, Locked On West Virginia. But I was talking to him about this, and he was kind of like, man, I thought maybe you would understand because you're a K-State guy, and you covered the team. You lived through Bill Snyder 2.0. I was like, you know, that is a fair point from you. I think Bill Snyder is a unicorn, and I would not suggest trying to replicate that. And I was vehemently against that hire when it happened. I was. K-State Collegian article to prove it. You used to be able to still find it on the internet. The Collegian must have changed how they archive things. So I could not find it anymore. The comment section was hilarious. People just crushing me for not liking that Bill Snyder hire back in 2009. Here's the difference, though, between this and Scott Frost. Like, this is why I like this one more than I do Frost, even though I have my doubts. One, at the Power 4 level, like, Scott Frost only has disaster on his resume as a head coach. He was 10-26 in the Big Ten. He was 10-26 in the Big Ten. Rich Rod had a great run, first of all, at West Virginia, 60-26. He had 3 straight 10-win seasons. And then even beyond that, right, he flames out at Michigan. They only let him go 3 years instead of Frost getting, 5? Was it 5 or 6 at Nebraska? Probably too many. After he gets canned at Michigan, he resurfaces at Arizona, and At Arizona, he was 500 or better in 5 of 6 seasons. He had 1 10-win season there. So, like, the guy's got 4 10-plus win seasons at the Power 4, Power 5, whatever you want to call it, power level in college football. That, to me, is something that feels like the floor is higher than from Scott Frost, where the only time we see him do it at that level, bottom completely fell out. And then Rich Rod also built something at Jacksonville State. He has done that. I still would say a part of the reason that I have my reservations about this, like, okay, all those things are on Rich Rod's resume that I just listed off there. Why has nobody been coming after him? Why was nobody else really interested? Why have we not really heard his name for other big Power 4 jobs? And that's where, again, I think the nostalgia can get you with somebody who may not be coveted at that level. Either way, I think there's less risk with Rich Rod than there is with Scott Frost based on track record as a Power 4 head coach. And I will say, I understand West Virginia fans, how you build this case, right? I get it. First of all, this will be something that will be pretty easy for a lot of the fan base to really rally behind. Even if you're not on board right away and you would have preferred Andy Kotelnicki, you would have preferred whoever, the Monken thing, that was not one that I would have liked. Maybe there are some out there that really wanted to run triple option and loved the idea of that. You might have been in another camp, but when it's your guy and it's somebody that is beloved there and you've got great memories of him, it will be much easier to get on board. I just brought up my situation with Bill Snyder. I hated the hire. I crushed the hire when it happened, but I fell in line pretty quickly because the second that I was back at the spring game, I remember vividly being at that spring game that year. And as I'm there, the same old warm-up music was back. All the Van Halen and stuff that was playing, Van Halen and Queen in the Snyder heyday when I was watching them win 11 games, 6 out of 7 years. And I was back in. I'm like, man, discipline, Bill Snyder, toughness, let's go. He's walking around in a suit. Things are more organized. All right, screw it, I'm in. It's easier to get people together and like unite the fan base with that. Also, easy to do it with the NIL collective, right? Like I say collective, with your donors to back NIL here, right? Hey, this is Rich Rod. This is our guy. Like, yeah, of course he's going to get support. He's got a pretty big, he's got an alum that played under him that has a pretty big platform these days, makes quite a bit of money. I'm sure they could probably find a way to get some help from him. So you'll say, hey, he'll get the NIL support. He'll get the fan base behind him. That's going to help out here. No doubt it will. No doubt it will. It will help. Does that mean that Rich Rod is still going to be, I guess I'll put it this way. Is Pat White walking through that door? Is Steve Slayton walking through that door? I don't know. We'll find out. We'll see. The other point here, though, is the rest of the coaching carousel. I mean, my God, North Carolina just hired Bill Belichick. Like, what? Cool. The coaching hires so far this cycle, like, even like Purdue hired Barry Odom. Okay, that's a guy that has a very similar resume to Rich Rod. He was, and Scott Frost, maybe more similar to Scott Frost, actually, because he builds himself up into a Power 4 head coach at Mizzou. Mediocre, doesn't work out there, and then has to go back to UNLV. Now he's getting hired here at another Power 4 job at Purdue. That's not a particularly sexy candidate to me, even though UNLV was pretty good this year. North Carolina hiring Bill Belichick could not possibly be less sexy to me. And the report that I saw the tweet earlier, maybe I should make sure this is confirmed if it's an actual report or just a rumor. 3 for $30 million being the contract there. You're going to pay Bill Belichick $10 million. I don't know. That has much more disaster potential than Rich Rod. I will tell you that. I would agree with that. That is much more disaster potential than Rich Rod. So I get it. I understand West Virginia fans. There's also this thing working against you that is like, hey, if you want to hire an Andy Kotelnicki, I would imagine that Kotelnicki would say, well, hey, I'm in the college football playoff right now. This is a pretty big deal. Like, I can't bail on these guys, and we may be playing for a little while. We're going to be a heavy favorite against SMU in that first game. Like, I'm probably going to be tied up until at least the end of the month. So I can't just bail and do it right now. And at West Virginia, you're saying, well, dude, the portal, like, we gotta get this rolling, man. It's portal season. We need a coach now. So some of this is the calendar in college football works against you, and it can force your hand into some of this. So that could have hurt with who I think out of all the names that I saw, even down to like Brian Hartline at Ohio State that I saw today, of all the candidates that I saw, Andy Kotelnicki would have been my favorite. If I were a West Virginia fan and I wanted the best for my program, that was my favorite, but it's hard to do when he's in the playoff. I get it. I do get it. I worry about the downside of this. And then if that happens, Rich Rod's ruining some legacy there at West Virginia. And how down in the dumps will the fan base be if you bring back conquering hero and it doesn't work now here? There's a lot of downside potentially there. If it were like an Andy Kotelnicki or a John Summerall, it would be easier for me to get on board. But anyway, that's where I'm at. Cyclone Steve, I see you asking about the Iowa State Utah moves. Getting there in just a moment, my friend. Getting there in just a moment. Quick call to action, though, if you want to be a part of the show tonight. If you want to guarantee your question or comment makes it on, click the $ below the chat box in order to do so, to create a super chat. Appreciate all of you who do that. And hey, totally free way to support the channel. Like the video, subscribe to the Open for Business newsletter, ofbnews.com, in order to do that. That's ofbnews.com. 3,200 plus Big 12 fans already subscribe and read that. So I appreciate that. A question about Cam Rising returning. It is not looking likely because the Utah news is about what they have done at quarterback. I will get to that in just a moment. Iowa State made a really good move. Iowa State made a really good, savvy move, and I do think it ties into the North Carolina job. In contrast to West Virginia and UCF, Iowa State has their current Scott Frost and their current Rich Rod, the guy who means that type of thing to their program. They've got him right now, and they just locked him up with an 8-year contract extension after I have been told he turned down another job. So more on that in just a moment. But this is such a rock-solid move for Iowa State as we have the coaching carousel going on, which is sexier, and signing a coach to an extension, especially after a blowout Big 12 championship game loss, may slide under the radar a little bit. But Campbell is locked down. So Iowa State head coach Matt Campbell has agreed to a new 8-year contract through the 2032 season. The school announced today. Campbell led the Cyclones to their first 10-win season in school history this year. He had recently been linked to the North Carolina opening. Financial terms were not disclosed. Frankly, I don't know that it really matters. He's worth whatever you're going to pay him. At Iowa State, pulling in the first 10-win season ever, and just the high floor that he has as a coach that I've long talked about, that is very much worth whatever money Iowa State is going to pay him. And now he has proven that he's got a higher ceiling than I gave him credit for at the beginning of the year. And I know, like Iowa State fans, I've seen some of you coming after me for those comments that I made at the beginning of the year, that I just doubted what his ceiling would be. It's why I didn't pick them 1 or 2 in the Big 12 this year, because the one time he made the Big 12 championship game, it was COVID. And I think they either had incredible COVID luck or just weren't as strict about it as everybody else. And we had a lot of weird things happening that year. Texas A&M, North Carolina. I think it indicates that was a bit of a weird, fluky year. Iowa State fans don't want to hear that. Understood. I get it. This has proven any of that. Like, hey, the guy has a Big 12 championship game ceiling. The guy has a 10-win ceiling. He's done it. He proved it. And he did all of that coming back from the dead after having a 4-win season with a massive scandal that cost him a bunch of players, including his quarterback. So Matt Campbell has now shown you he's got the ceiling to go with the high floor. You pay him whatever the hell it is that you've got to pay him. We got a quote from Jamie Pollard, giving all the uncertainty facing college athletics. It was critical we moved quick to solidify the future of our program. Hey, agreed on that. It is definitely something to do. Campbell, 9th season, longest tenured coach in school history. behind Dan McCarney and Clay Stapleton. Good old Clay Stapleton. Who could forget the Clay Stapleton era? And he already has the most wins in school history. He surpassed that earlier this year. So you got to lock him up. And Iowa State did. I know that the joke, like I have the bit. By the way, I capitalized Iowa State fans on my bit today, and I tweeted Iowa State head coach Matt Campbell, which is like, we've come full circle on this entire bit with Matt Campbell, where, he's been mentioned for just about every major Power 4 job that came open within the last 7 years. When did he first win at Oklahoma? Whenever he first won in Norman, was that 17? Ever since that happened, the guy's been mentioned for every major Power 4 job opening, but has obviously never jumped to take that. So it came as absolutely no surprise when earlier, I guess last week, within the last week, we saw his name coming up for North Carolina. It was in the mix at North Carolina. It sounded like the Tar Heels really did like him as a candidate there, but I was told he did turn that job down. And you just saw the line in the story there from Pete Thamel that he was someone who had been mentioned there. So they're not officially reporting anything was turned down, but it's clear that there was interest in Matt Campbell from North Carolina. That is not a job that would have really scared me if I were an Iowa State fan, especially at this point when you're this far down the road and his name has been out there for so many jobs. But it just, North Carolina is not something I would be interested in, especially for him. You think about North Carolina is definitely the country club vibe. North Carolina is country club. Why do you think Mac Brown went from Texas, the ultimate country club, to North Carolina? It's a job for that type of guy, which is weird again that Bill Belichick winds up taking the job. He does not come across as the warmest, friendliest guy, but it's one where you've got to manage a lot of cooks in the kitchen. That's another thing that's come out through this process, is that North Carolina's got a lot of people trying to make decisions. Anyone who's followed this channel throughout realignment knows all about that, because the realignment decisions, and is it SEC or Big Ten? And there were factions of people who want to go to the SEC, people who want to go to the Big Ten, or people who want to stay in the ACC. You just got a lot of people, a lot of cooks in the kitchens, what that phrase was made for with what's going on at North Carolina. And it appears that's how it really played out with their head coaching search and how this went down. But beyond just that, country club culture, way too many cooks in the kitchen. You're going to have to deal with stuff that you don't really want to deal with and that you don't have to deal with at Iowa State. Will you get full throat support for football? This is a place where basketball is king. Will you actually get full support for football? I'm sure they could try to give him some assurances for that. You're always going to be playing second fiddle to North Carolina hoops in some regard. And especially I would want to know what's the commitment going to be if we are joining a Power 2 conference, which seems likely at some point in the future. North Carolina is the most coveted realignment piece on the board, not named Notre Dame. So eventually they're going to be in another conference. That feels very much inevitable. It's just a matter probably of when, not if. If it is something that happens soon, realignment can happen very quickly. If it is something that happens soon, you damn well better have the full throat resources that you need and support that you need if you're going to take that job. So I get it. Makes a lot of sense for Campbell. Makes a lot of sense for Iowa State. It's a good move, honestly, for the league. If you're a Big 12 fan, good to keep him around. We'll see what the rest of the coaching carousel brings. Really, I guess the only other thing you'd be thinking of if you are an Iowa State fan is, all right, well, what's going to happen with Ryan Day? If Ohio State goes out there and chokes at home to Tennessee, is Ryan Day going to get run? And then do you have to start to worry about that? Maybe so, perhaps. But for now, that's got to feel pretty good if you are an Iowa State fan, and pretty good, honestly, just if you're a general Big 12 fan, about keeping him around. Now, as for Utah, okay, I said Utah also, like Iowa State, made a pretty sneaky, somewhat under the radar move that I think could pay massive dividends for them. And it's crazy for me to have to say that Utah is a sneaky team in the Big 12 to watch out for this upcoming year. because they were the preseason pick to win the league last year in their first year in the Big 12. But I think it's really easy right now for people to be out on Utah. And I'm here to tell you, you should not be out on Utah. You should not let this, Big 12 fans especially, because this is the year that you've watched them more closely than you have over the last few. I would not put Utah out of your mind in terms of like who can win this league, who can be really good next year. Because they signed quarterback Devin Dampier from New Mexico. Okay. He's also coming to follow his offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, who Utah brought in to be the OC. This is a very, very good move that I love a lot for Utah. Devin Dampier is a really fun quarterback. And my apologies. I will be honest. I know that I could sit here and BS you and be like, man, I love this kid. I watched him a ton this year. No, I did not know much about him, and I may be pronouncing his name wrong. I did not know much about him before I saw that Utah brought him in. But I definitely raised an eyebrow. Like, all right, well, that's interesting. In the initial tweet you see, you're like, damn, that kid was putting up a ton of offense. Yeah, he was putting up a ton of offense. He was just a sophomore this year. The Lobos averaged 484 yards of offense per game, fourth best in the country. They scored 33 points per game, which is 27th in the country. He himself was top 10 in total offense per game in the country. And it was his first season as a full-time starter. He had 2,768 yards passing and 1,166 yards rushing. So you talk about a dual threat. Like, this kid is good. They even list in this write-up that I was reading about him his stats against Power 4 schools this year: Arizona, Auburn, Washington State. Okay, so they're saying former Power 5. Arizona, Auburn, Washington State. He threw for a combined 725 yards with 5 touchdowns and 4 picks. And he had 354 yards and 5 TDs on the ground. So if you add that up in those games, so that'd be about 1,079 total yards. You know, you're looking at 330-ish per game and 10 touchdowns. So you're looking at 3 touchdowns per game, 300 yards total offense, 3 touchdowns per game against Power 5 competition. And look, before you start running and saying, well, dude, New Mexico finished 5-6 this year. I mean, come on. How good could they have possibly been? Is this a little bit hollow? You should probably take into account New Mexico's defense, which allowed 38 points and 492 yards per game. Kyle Whittingham, last I checked, will be handling the defense along with Morgan Scalley at Utah. So I don't think you need to worry about that. And the 5 wins, the 5-6 record, best since 2016 for New Mexico. So pretty good stuff here. Dampier's in pretty impressive territory when it comes to his accomplishments from this past year. Now, his offensive coordinator runs a spread offense. They use run-pass option a lot. It's at its best with a quarterback who can run, and that's definitely this dude. So the combination of those two I like a lot. He was durable despite running the ball 155 times. Now, that would concern me a bit. If you're going to keep running him at that pace, I think that's probably more exception than rule that he did that the entire year without getting hurt. But man, I love this move. And you combine this with the fact that I do think this is another thing that flew under the radar. I just said Matt Campbell kind of flew under the radar. Iowa State getting the extension signed with him. Kyle Whittingham announced that he is coming back this year. Very easy to be like, oh, what a terrible year for Utah. Last year was kind of mediocre. This year they were just flat out bad. Like, maybe it is time for Whittingham to hang it up. I would not have wanted that. Not at this point if I were a Utah fan. I don't know Morgan Scalley nearly as in-depth as a lot of Utah fans do. Maybe there is like a real yearning for him and whatever he would bring to the table that's different. But it would make me nervous. It would make me nervous, especially coming off of back-to-back years like that. If you were handing him the keys after the back-to-back Rose Bowls, that's one thing. Got more momentum. You've got better footing. To be trying to rebuild it up and then hand it over, didn't like that. So Whittingham coming back, I do think is important. I do think is important. And now you are adding on top of that the fact that you have a really dynamic, up-and-coming offensive coordinator and an incredibly dynamic quarterback. That seems like a really good move. And they've gone from, they've completely retooled the offense, right? Like everybody's out, Isaac Wilson out, Brandon Rose out. You're retooling this offense from the ground up. If you can do it with a quarterback and an offensive coordinator that know each other already, man, sign me up for that. Obviously a talented one. You want it to be a talented one, but especially when he's already going to know the OC, and that will take away a lot of the learning curve and stuff that you might have to deal with. Sign me up. As a K-State basketball fan, I'm in the middle of watching what it is like trying to integrate an almost entirely new roster through the transfer portal, and it is not going very well. And if you can mitigate some of that in this era by bringing a guy who already knows the coach, already knows the offensive coordinator, the play caller, that seems like a huge advantage. So I think these have been a couple of really savvy moves. If they have figured out the offense, Utah's going to have a defense, people. Utah is going to have a defense. It is Kyle Whittingham and Morgan Scalley. They will have a defense that will be good. I have zero doubt about that. In fact, in terms of things that I have little doubt about in the Big 12 in general, it is a short list that would be things that I have less doubt about than Utah will play good defense next year. So if this is the fix for the offense, they're going to be right back in it. They are going to be right back in it. And we literally saw last year, this year, Arizona State go from being picked last to winning the league. It is absolutely not out of the question that Utah can turn right back around and do that, wipe a lot of the bad taste out of their mouth from this past year, and be a Big 12 contender. Zero doubt about that in my mind, and I think these have been a couple of really big first steps toward that. I get it. I'm seeing people asking about Cam Rising or, hey, Utah without Cam Rising may be different. Yeah, it sucks that Cam Rising, it never worked out, but it would just 2 years of this, you can't put yourself through that again. You've got to move on. And Utah has been a good winning program for longer than Cam Rising has been there. Got to the back-to-back Rose Bowls, perhaps, different heights with him at its absolute peak, but it had been a long time since Cam Rising had been that guy. That's just the harsh reality of it all. And recovering from that, proving that you are a program that is more than just a quarterback, it's what you got to do. It seems like Whittingham is on board with doing that. I think Utah will be a big mover in the Big 12 standings going into next year. Maybe that's not a hot take. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the offseason buzz is going to surround Baylor, probably, Baylor, Iowa State, Arizona State. You're going to hear a lot about those teams. I don't think you'll hear as much about Utah. Watch out for them. I would put it that way. Watch out for Utah and what may happen with what they're building right now. Really, really like that. Okay. A couple housekeeping items here before I get to my last thing to talk about BYU and signing the number one college basketball player in the class of 2025. If you could like the video, I would love that. Appreciate it. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you are here on YouTube. Many of you aren't who watch every week. So if you subscribe, I would much appreciate that. Get access to everything. You'll get alerts. If you click the bell whenever it is that I'm going live and or dropping content. So that would be wonderful. And subscribe to the Big 12 newsletter, Open for Business. It's ofbnews.com to do that, ofbnews.com. Big 12 news straight to your inbox 3 times per week. No SEC or Big 10 bias. Cut through all that. I do it for you. I'm going to tell you what matters with the news that is coming out in college athletics. So, pretty cool story earlier this week. AJ DeBonsta signs with BYU. He announces it on First Take. And, man, if you think about just things for the conference right now, getting that level of attention, having a guy sign, do it on First Take, having to be the number one player in the country who looks to be a complete superstar, and he's signing with BYU. It's a cool look for the league. Not many people would have expected that, especially when North Carolina, Kansas, Alabama are the primary competition there. And you can say what you want about money or whatever, but this will be big for BYU. This will be big for the league as a whole. A great thing for Brett Yormark and what he's looking to do with basketball, by the way, and this league right now. I love the fact that it came out afterwards. We find out like DeBonstead actually like signed before all of this hoopla this week, a couple of weeks ago, and we're just now all like finding out about it. Credit to everybody for holding in the secret on that. But this is so much better than a player like that going to Kansas, North Carolina, or Alabama. No, those are obviously phenomenal programs, but this will make it so much more intriguing to see how he does in a new place, and especially a place like BYU that has so much potential because of how big it is, national fan base, obviously the NIL resources that are being pumped in there because, you know, the reports are that this took upwards of $7 million to get done. It's not cheap. But you've also got this young coach from the NBA that is very intriguing, and Kevin Young at BYU right now, that feeding him a player like this, seeing what he can do with it, I think is awesome. And just being that it's someone not one of the traditional powers. I know Alabama's not a traditional power, but in the last 5 years, they've turned into a modern power, went to a Final Four last year, spread the wealth. Such a perfect encapsulation, by the way, of like what NIL has turned into and what it's done to the playing field, leveled the playing field. How much are we talking about that right now in football? We're talking about it with the college football playoff. Hey, it's a little bit different now. The SEC is not this dominant bulldozing machine, or at least they don't have one of those teams at the top because the talent level is getting spread out more now with the portal. Ole Miss can build like an insane roster through the portal instead of having to have one of those guys at the ready. Now, maybe that is a poor example because that's another SEC team, right? But we have seen it the way things have gone. The reason that we have a playoff field that looks like it does is because talent is becoming a little bit more spread out. And even if you want to say, oh, money, you know, it's just that, well, they money whipped this kid into coming there. I mean, like, who cares? That's the new day and age that we're in college sports, my friend. And if that's what it takes to go get the number one guy to come to your school, play ball, man. Teach me the game. What is it? Teach me the rules. I'll play the game. Like, hey, those are the rules now. Those are the rules now. BYU went out and got it done, made it happen. And that's some of the beauty of it. If this were a recruitment from what, 10 years ago, this is a recruitment in 2014. And it's Alabama, North Carolina, and Kansas. I mean, you figure the kid's going to North Carolina or Kansas. Like, this gives BYU the chance to pull in somebody of this caliber. It is a great equalizer. And even in basketball, you know, we're talking more about talent being spread out in football. Even in basketball, that's a really, really good thing. I personally really enjoyed watching, well, obviously I enjoyed Michael Beasley, at K-State, but like Kevin Durant, I know Texas, still big, powerful school, but that was not a big, powerful basketball school necessarily that he went to. Instead of sending these guys to traditional powers, man, get the kid to BYU. Get the kid to BYU. I like it a lot. He is the favorite to be the number one pick in the 2026 NBA draft. That is exactly the type of guy that Brett Yormark will really want to market for this league. You want great teams. You want teams that can win, but you also want players that are recognizable in a personality. And some of what he is going to provide right away is a guy that people are aware of, not just because he's the number one recruit, but even now, you know, with the portal, like, people care so much more about the portal than they do actual high school kids anymore. So being the number one kid out of the high school ranks doesn't carry as much weight as it used to. People know him because of how much attention that story got with the NIL prices, right? Like, this turned into a thing where everyone was saying, like, this is a crazy NIL deal that's going to have to come through to actually get him there. And so he has become a name that people know and recognize. That can work against you. Ask Coleman Hawkins at K-State. It was reported that he got $2 million. So at least reportedly, it was in that ballpark, and playing poorly. He's taken a lot of crap this year from his own fans and from outside of the fan base because of the amount of money he's making. So this can definitely flip on its head. But it's a guy that people will know, which will create an instant brand for him, create a lot of viewers, eyeballs to the TV, and just somebody that's going to make BYU basketball like must watch and get you a lot more run out of like the games with CBS. I'm sure looking at it now, like, man, we can get BYU on some CBS games next year because of the deal that the Big 12 has there. Or now, hey, we've got TNT, TBS, like Turner coming into the mix with that story that broke just a couple of weeks ago. So this can be a great, great thing for exposure for the Big 12 and obviously BYU as well. But excited to see that. Felt like that was kind of an inevitability the whole way. The BYU was really the favorite, and a big part of that because they had their NIL game right, man. Give them credit for it. Don't hate. Don't hate on it. That would be my message. All right, let's close with Alan. Appreciate you, Alan. Thank you for being here. Alan says, John, great show. Thank you, sir. Go Arizona State. Hope you embarrass Texas or Clemson. Well, yeah, I hope they embarrass them as well. I saw Rick Neuheisel. Was it Neuheisel? No, it was Aaron Taylor. I was at a bar earlier and they had on TV CBS Sports Network. Rick Neuheisel had like SMU in the Final Four. I think he had a crazy one, but then Aaron Taylor picked Arizona State to beat Clemson. I think he had Clemson beating Texas and then Arizona State beating Clemson and advancing to the Final Four and then losing there. But there are at least some believers out there. Any news on the KU offensive coordinator? Wasn't that an internal hire? Yeah, Matt Lubick. This is from yesterday. Named co-offensive coordinator, tight ends coach. Okay, yeah, he was back at, that's right. He was with KU, then he was back at Nevada this year. So more or less, I guess, like an internal hire there for Kansas. He was at KU in 2022 and 2023 as a senior analyst. Yeah, it seems okay. It's not splashy, but I don't think you need a splashy hire. I feel like I've kind of made that point with a lot of what I've talked about with the head coaching hires, like ball coach as opposed to a name. That's why I loathe the North Carolina hire. If I'm a North Carolina fan, I'm glad they did it for me. I will love to watch that. It'll be fascinating, a great experiment from a content perspective, but I loathe the idea of going out and paying Bill Belichick $10 million a year instead of paying half that much for a guy who's just like a good up-and-coming ball coach, which is what I would think you need more. So it feels like it fits more into that category. And I think Kansas did that with their defensive coordinator hire too, right? Keeping things more in-house. It certainly is very similar to what Chris Kleiman has done for a lot of hires. I would just say you got to put your trust in Lance Leipold on that. The Jeff Grimes thing is very interesting to me because by the end of the year, the offense was really humming. And I think you can make a case like, hey, a lot of this was probably just some rust from Jalen Daniels. Was it really as much Grimes' fault as everybody thought and blamed him for at the beginning of the year, and now he's leaving? I know people are celebrating, but we'll see. Some of the overall numbers for Kansas in a lot of areas, turnovers a big one that was more of a negative this year, but it's not as bad. Like not as bad as you would have thought for Grimes and all the crap that he took at the beginning of the year. So interesting. Anyway, Alan, that's my read on the situation there, but I appreciate you being here as always. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for me. Once again, please, if you want more content from me, you can subscribe right now to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com. In order to do that, I appreciate everybody who does, the 3,200 plus of you who are subscribers already. like the video on your way out the door, and make sure that you subscribe. That helps me out as well. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the newsletter, like the video. Appreciate all of you guys. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. I will talk to you all very soon. Take care.